I was lying on that cold hospital floor, blood pooling beneath me, watching my dreams die along with my baby. My billionaire husband stood in the doorway, fixing his cufflinks like nothing happened. He thought money could bury this secret. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Before I tell you how I made this man lose everything he ever loved, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of how this story ends. And stick around until the end because what happened in that courtroom will shock you. My name is Monique Thomas, and I need you to understand something right from the start. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't naive. I was a 28-year-old woman with a master's degree in art history, managing one of the most prestigious galleries in Atlanta. I had my own apartment, my own car, my own life. I didn't need saving, or so I thought. I met Brandon Whitmore at a charity gala on a warm September evening. You know the type. Champagne flowing like water, string quartet in the corner, everyone dressed like they just stepped off a yacht. I was there representing the gallery, trying to schmooze potential donors, when he walked up to me. 6'3", custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a smile that could melt glaciers. He was 42, a real estate mogul who owned half the commercial properties downtown. Forbes had just listed him as one of the wealthiest black men in America. Billionaire status, the kind of success story our community celebrates. He told me I was the most beautiful woman in the room, not in a creepy way, but genuine, like he really saw me. We talked for 3 hours straight about art, about growing up black in America, about our dreams. He listened when I spoke. Actually listened. Do you know how rare that is? By the end of the night, I had his number and a promise of dinner that weekend. The next 6 months were straight out of a fairy tale. Private jet trips to Paris, front row seats at Fashion Week, meeting Oprah at some exclusive event I can't even pronounce. He introduced me to his world like I belonged there, like I'd always belonged there. My friends were happy for me. My mama was skeptical, but even she softened when he showed up to Sunday dinner with flowers and compliments about her sweet potato pie. He proposed on a beach in Bali with a ring that could pay off student loans for a small college. We got married 3 months later in the Bahamas. 200 guests, Beyoncé's wedding planner, dressed by Vera Wang. My face was in Essence magazine. I was living the dream, right? I thought I'd finally made it. A black woman from the South Side, marrying a billionaire who looked like me, who came from nothing like me, who understood the struggle. I thought we were building a dynasty together. The mansion we moved into had 12 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and staff quarters. Staff. I had people who worked for me now. It felt surreal. But looking back, that house wasn't a home. It was a prison with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I just didn't know it yet. The first time I felt the shift was about 2 months after the wedding. I mentioned going back to work at the gallery, just part-time, because I missed it. Brandon's face changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. That warmth in his eyes went cold for just a second. He said I didn't need to work anymore, that he took care of me now, that his wife shouldn't be working like she needs the money. He said it with a smile, but it wasn't a request. I laughed it off, thinking he was being old-fashioned, traditional. I didn't push it. Then my friends started getting screened. He'd ask questions about them. Where did they work? What did their parents do? Were they really the kind of people I should be spending time with now? He never said I couldn't see them. He was smarter than that. He just made it difficult, uncomfortable. Eventually, I saw them less and less. My phone got quieter. My world got smaller. And somehow, he was always there, filling the space, telling me he was all I needed. The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process what had just happened. We were arguing about me wanting to visit my mama without him. I said I needed some space, some time with just my family. He said I was being ungrateful, that I was choosing them over him after everything he'd done for me. The argument escalated, and then his hand connected with my face so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap echoed through that big empty house. I stood there, hand on my burning cheek, staring at this man I thought I knew. And you know what he did? He cried. Broke down right there in the kitchen, sobbing about his stress, his pressure, how he'd never hurt me, how he didn't know what came over him. He begged me to forgive him, bought me a diamond bracelet the next day, took me to that restaurant I'd been wanting to try, promised it would never happen again. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. But it did happen again. And again. Each time with more apologies, more gifts, more promises. The cycle became predictable. We'd have a good week, maybe 2. Then tension would build over something small. Then the explosion. Then the honeymoon phase where he was the man I fell in love with again. I started walking on eggshells, monitoring my tone, my words, my face, anything to keep the peace. I stopped being me. I became whoever he needed me to be in that moment just to stay safe. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? I was married to Brandon Whitmore. We were relationship goals on social media. I had everything a woman could want. Who would believe that behind closed doors I was being terrorized? Who would care? I was ashamed. I felt like I'd failed. Like somehow this was my fault for not being enough, for not doing enough, for not loving him the right way. Then I found out I was pregnant, 12 weeks along. I took that test in the bathroom of the East Wing where he never went, and I just stared at those 2 pink lines for what felt like hours. Part of me was terrified, but another part, a part I didn't even know was still alive, felt hope. Maybe this would change things. Maybe a baby would bring back the man I married. Maybe we could be a real family. When I told Brandon, his face went red. Not happy red, angry red. He asked if I did this on purpose. If I trapped him. Those were his exact words. Did you trap me? I stood there with the positive test still in my hand, and this man, this billionaire who had everything, acted like I'd just ruined his life. He said he wasn't ready, that we hadn't planned this, that I was being selfish. Then he stormed out and didn't come home for 2 days, but he came back with baby books and apologies, said he was just scared, that he'd be a good father, that we'd figure it out together. I wanted to believe him so badly. I needed to believe him, so I did. The pregnancy made everything worse. His control intensified. He monitored what I ate, when I slept, who I talked to. He said it was because he cared about the baby, but it felt like surveillance. At 16 weeks, we had an argument about him staying out all night. I smelled perfume on his collar. When I confronted him, he pushed me. Not hard, he said, just enough to get me out of his way. But I was pregnant. I fell down 5 stairs before I caught myself on the railing. I lied to the doctor about the bruises, told her I was clumsy, that pregnancy made me off balance. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she couldn't force me to tell the truth. So she documented the injuries and let me leave with my abuser. I went home to that mansion, to that man, and pretended everything was fine. Brandon's threats became more specific. He told me no one would believe me if I said anything, that he owned half the police force through donations, that his lawyers would destroy me, that I'd end up with nothing, not even the baby, because what judge would give a child to a woman who couldn't even protect herself? He was right. I knew he was right, so I stayed quiet and prayed my baby would somehow survive this nightmare. At 24 weeks, I found hotel receipts in his jacket pocket, a hotel I knew we'd never been to together. When I searched his name online with the hotel name, gossip blogs popped up with photos of him and some woman named Gianna. They were all over each other outside the hotel bar. My husband, the father of my child, making a fool of me publicly while I carried his baby. That night, when he came home, I confronted him. I had the receipts in my hand, my phone with the photos pulled up. I wasn't yelling. I was calm. Too calm, probably. I just asked him why. Why wasn't I enough? Why would he do this while I was pregnant with his child? He told me to shut up, said I was being dramatic, that I was lucky he even came home to me, that plenty of women would kill to be in my position. I told him I wanted a divorce, that I was done, that he could have his money and his mistresses, but I was taking our baby and leaving. That's when he snapped. Really snapped. Not a slap this time, not a push. He grabbed me by my hair and slammed my head into the wall. I felt my vision blur. Then he started hitting me. Fists, not open hands, my ribs, my back, my face. I fell to the floor, and I did the only thing I could think of. I curled around my belly, trying to protect her, because by then I knew she was a girl, my daughter, Grace. I'd already named her in my head. But Brandon didn't care. He kicked me, kicked my stomach over and over while I screamed and begged him to stop, begged him to think about the baby. He said he never wanted her anyway, that I was stupid for thinking he'd be tied down to me forever because of one mistake. Those were his words. Our daughter was a mistake. Then he just stopped, fixed his clothes, fixed his hair, and walked out, left me bleeding on the cold bathroom floor. I don't know how long I laid there. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. Time felt strange. Eventually, I managed to crawl to where my phone had fallen, called 911, told them I needed help, that I was pregnant and bleeding, that I thought my baby was dying. The paramedics came fast. The hospital was a blur of lights and voices and hands touching me, and then the doctor's face. I'll never forget her face, the pity in her eyes when she told me they couldn't find a heartbeat, that my daughter was gone, that they'd have to induce labor to deliver her, deliver my dead baby girl. I don't remember much about those next hours, just pain, physical pain from the beating and the delivery, emotional pain that felt like it was swallowing me whole. They let me hold her afterward. She was so small, perfect little fingers, perfect little face. She looked like me. She should have been alive, should have been crying, should have been breathing. But she was still and cold, and it was Brandon's fault. He showed up at the hospital with lawyers, not to apologize, not to mourn, to control the narrative. The police came too. Standard procedure for cases like this. But Brandon had already paid them off. I could tell by how they looked at me, with suspicion instead of concern. He told them I fell, that I was clumsy, that I'd fallen down the stairs. The same lie I'd been telling for months. Except now it was his lie, and they believed him because he's Brandon Whitmore, billionaire philanthropist, and I'm just his wife. They took photos of my injuries, asked me questions, but I was so tired, so broken. I just nodded along, said I fell, confirmed his story, let him win again. The officers left, the lawyers left. And then Brandon leaned close to my hospital bed and whispered that I better keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me. Then he left too. I spent a week in that hospital, alone, no visitors except the nurses. My phone stayed silent. Brandon had isolated me so completely that I didn't even have anyone to call. But one nurse, Angela, she saw through everything. She'd been a domestic violence survivor herself. She recognized the signs, the injuries that didn't match the story, the fear in my eyes, the way I flinched when anyone moved too fast. Angela sat with me one night after her shift ended, told me her story, showed me her scars, and then she gave me a card for a women's shelter and the name of an attorney who specialized in cases like mine. She said I didn't have to live like this, that there was a way out, that I deserved justice for myself and my baby girl. For the first time in months, someone saw me, really saw me. Not Mrs. Brandon Whitmore, not the trophy wife, not the victim too scared to speak, but Monique, a woman who deserved to live without fear, a mother who lost her child to violence, a survivor who had the power to fight back. I made a decision in that hospital bed. Brandon was going to pay for what he did, not just to me, but to Grace. My daughter deserved justice even if she never got to take a breath. So I kept that card, memorized the number, and started planning. When I got home, I played the dutiful wife, acted like nothing changed. But everything had changed. I started documenting everything, every bruise, every threat, every text message. I took photos of myself when he wasn't looking, recorded arguments on my phone, kept a journal with dates and details of every incident. I became a detective in my own life, gathering evidence against my abuser. Then I reached out to the attorney Angela recommended, Beverly Okonkwo, a fierce black woman who'd built her career on taking down powerful men who hurt women. She believed me immediately, didn't question my story, didn't ask what I did to provoke him, just listened and started building a case. Beverly helped me find Gianna, Brandon's mistress. Turned out she wasn't just some side piece, she was another victim. Brandon had been abusing her too, and she wasn't the first. Beverly's investigators found 3 other women Brandon had dated before me. All had similar stories. All had been paid off to stay quiet. Brandon had a pattern. My case wasn't isolated, it was systemic. We worked in secret for months. Beverly got me a wire, had me document conversations with Brandon where I'd bring up what happened. At first, he'd deny it, but I learned how to push his buttons, how to make him angry enough to slip up, and one night, he did. He admitted everything, said no one would care about another dead black baby anyway, that black women like me were disposable, that he could do whatever he wanted because money meant power, and power meant immunity. I had him, on tape, in his own words, confessing to killing our daughter. Beverly filed charges, assault, fetal homicide, domestic violence. Then we went public, held a press conference where I told my story, showed my scars, spoke my daughter's name. The media went crazy. Brandon's carefully crafted image shattered overnight. Sponsors dropped him. Business partners distanced themselves. His empire started crumbling because the world finally saw him for what he was, a monster in expensive suits. The trial was brutal. His lawyers tried everything, said I was lying for money, that I was bitter about the affair, that I'd hurt myself for attention. They dragged my name through every kind of mud they could find. But I had evidence. Medical records, photos, recordings, and I had Gianna and the other women who stood up and testified about what he'd done to them too. I sat in that witness stand for 6 hours, looked the jury in the eyes and told them everything, every detail, every moment of pain, every second of fear. I told them about Grace, about how I'd already picked out her nursery colors, about how I'd felt her kick for the first time while I was reading a book about strong black women, about how her father murdered her because I dared to question his loyalty. When they played the recording of Brandon's confession, the courtroom went silent. You could hear people crying, jurors wiping their eyes, and Brandon just sat there, stone-faced, like he still thought his money would save him. It didn't. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Came back with guilty verdicts on all charges, criminal conviction, 15 years in prison, then the civil trial. Beverly sued for $250 million. The jury awarded every penny, plus court costs, plus attorney fees. I watched them handcuff Brandon right there in the courtroom, watched this man who'd controlled every aspect of my life lose control of his own. He looked at me as they led him away. Probably expected me to cry or gloat or show some emotion, but I just smiled, a small, quiet smile, because Grace got her justice, and so did I. That was 3 years ago. Today, I run a foundation called Grace's Promise. We help domestic violence survivors escape their abusers. We've helped over 200 women find safety, legal representation, and new lives. I rebuilt my relationship with my mama, my friends, my family. I went back to the gallery, back to my own life, my own identity. I'm not gonna lie and say I'm completely healed. Some scars don't fade. I still have nightmares sometimes, still flinch at loud noises, still struggle with trust, but I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm using my story to help other women know they're not alone. Brandon thought his money made him untouchable. He thought being a billionaire meant he could throw away black lives, mine, our babies, like garbage. But here's what he forgot. God doesn't sleep on evil, and neither do I. If this story touched you, please share it. There's a woman right now living my nightmare who needs to know she's not alone, that there is a way out. Drop a comment if you've survived or know someone who has. Let's build a community of survivors, not victims. Subscribe for more real stories about real women taking back their power. And remember, your life is worth more than his apologies. Always. Hit that like button, share this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, queens.
Struggling waitress fixed billionaire's broken arm for nothing. Her life changed in ways she never imagined. What if a single moment of kindness could change 2 lives forever? Claire wiped down the cracked vinyl booth for the 3rd time that morning, her worn sneakers squeaking against the diner's faded linoleum floor. At 36, she'd been working double shifts at Murphy's Diner for 2 years, ever since her husband's medical bills had drained their savings account dry. The morning rush had slowed to a trickle, leaving only the familiar hum of the coffee machine and the distant rumble of 18-wheelers on the interstate outside. She glanced at the clock above the pie case, 10:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, she could take her first break, maybe call the hospital to check on Dad's test results. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the dish towel, a habit she'd developed since the stress started eating at her sleep. The little bell above the door chimed, and Claire looked up to see a well-dressed man stumbling inside, his expensive suit torn at the shoulder, his face pale with pain. "Please," he whispered. "I think my arm is broken. Where are you watching from today?" Claire rushed toward the stranger, her nursing school training from 15 years ago kicking in before her mind could catch up. The man was clutching his left arm against his chest, his breathing shallow and uneven. Despite his obvious wealth, she could tell from his Italian leather shoes and gold watch. There was something vulnerable about him that reminded her of her father in his hospital bed. "Sit down, honey," she said gently, guiding him to the nearest booth. "I'm Claire. What's your name?" He winced as he settled into the seat, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the diner's chilly air conditioning. "Daniel," he managed through gritted teeth. "I was driving to a meeting when a deer ran into the road. Swerved and hit a tree about a mile back. My phone's dead, and I saw your lights." Claire's heart ached for this stranger. She'd seen enough pain in her family to recognize when someone was trying to be brave while falling apart inside. Without hesitation, she grabbed the first aid kit from behind the counter and knelt beside his booth, her practiced hands gently examining his arm through his torn jacket. "This definitely needs a doctor," she said softly, "but I can make a temporary sling to stabilize it until we get you to the hospital." Daniel watched her work, surprised by her confidence and the way her touch managed to be both professional and deeply comforting. Most people in his world wanted something from him, but this woman seemed focused only on helping. As Claire fashioned a makeshift sling from dish towels, she kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation to distract him from the pain. She told him about her father's recent surgery, how she'd learned to stay calm during medical emergencies, how this little diner had become like a second home to her. Daniel found himself genuinely listening, something he hadn't done with a stranger in years. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly as she adjusted the sling with careful hands. "You don't even know me." Claire paused, meeting his eyes with a warmth that seemed to light up the dim diner. "Because that's what people do for each other," she said simply. "Besides, you look like you could use a friend right now." Neither of them realized that this moment would become the foundation of something neither expected. After Claire called for an ambulance, Daniel insisted on waiting with her rather than having her close the diner early. As they sat together, he learned that Claire had been working 16-hour days to pay for her father's heart surgery, that she'd given up her nursing career to care for her family, and that she hadn't taken a real day off in months. Her selflessness struck him as profound in a world where most people he encountered were motivated by personal gain. "You mentioned nursing school," Daniel said, watching her pour him coffee with hands that had clearly mastered the art of caring for others. "Do you miss it?" Claire's smile faltered for just a moment. "Every day," she admitted, then quickly brightened. "But family comes first, you know? Dad raised me by himself after Mom died, worked 3 jobs to put me through school. Now it's my turn to take care of him." Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of love and sacrifice that he'd forgotten could exist. In his world of corporate mergers and board meetings, people's motivations were usually transparent and self-serving. But Claire's devotion to her father reminded him of his own grandmother, who had raised him with the same fierce, protective love after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. The ambulance arrived, and as the paramedics prepared to take Daniel to the hospital, he realized he didn't want this connection to end. "Claire," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket with his good arm, "please take this for your father's medical bills." He pulled out a business card with a check already written on the back, for $50,000. Claire stared at the check, her face going pale. "I can't accept this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't help you for money. I helped you because it was the right thing to do." I know, Daniel said gently. That's exactly why you deserve it. As the paramedics wheeled him toward the ambulance, Claire looked down at the business card. Daniel Morrison, CEO, Morrison Industries. Her breath caught. She'd heard that name on the news. Morrison Industries was worth billions. If this moment touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. But what Claire didn't know was that Daniel Morrison had been on his way to finalize the sale of Morrison Industries that morning, planning to walk away from the business empire his grandmother had helped him build. Meeting Claire had reminded him of something he'd lost along the way, the simple power of human kindness. 3 days later, Claire stood in her father's hospital room, the check still folded in her pocket, untouched. She'd tried to research Daniel Morrison online, but the more she read about his wealth and success, the more uncomfortable she felt about accepting his money. Her father, breathing easier after his successful surgery, noticed her distracted demeanor. "What's eating at you, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice still weak but filled with the same gentle wisdom that had guided her through every difficult decision in her life. Claire told him about Daniel, about the accident, and about the check that could solve all their financial problems. "But Dad," she said, tears forming in her eyes, "what if he thinks I was kind to him because I knew who he was? What if this changes who I am?" Her father reached for her hand with fingers that trembled slightly from the medication. "Claire, honey, your kindness isn't something that can be bought or sold. It's who you are, in your bones. If this man wants to help us because your heart touched his, then maybe that's not about you taking something you don't deserve. Maybe it's about him giving something he needs to give." Meanwhile, Daniel lay in his own hospital bed across town, his arm in a proper cast, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Claire's words. That's what people do for each other. He'd built his fortune by being calculating, strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But Claire had helped him simply because he needed help, expecting nothing in return. It was a purity of motive he'd forgotten existed. His assistant brought him reports about the proposed sale of Morrison Industries, but for the first time in years, Daniel couldn't focus on profit margins and market projections. Instead, he kept thinking about the way Claire had knelt beside his booth, how her hands had been so gentle as she made his makeshift sling, how she'd talked to him like he was just another human being in pain rather than a CEO worth $3 billion. That evening, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his lawyer and canceled the sale of Morrison Industries. Instead, he wanted to transform the company's mission to create a foundation that would help people like Claire, those who sacrifice their own dreams to care for others. Have you ever faced something like this, where helping someone else showed you something important about yourself? Let us know in the comments. But first, Daniel needed to see Claire again, to thank her properly, and to make sure she understood that her kindness had changed his life just as much as his check could change hers. A week later, Claire was wiping down tables at Murphy's Diner when the little bell chimed again. She looked up to see Daniel walking through the door, his arm still in a sling but his color much improved. Behind him walked an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair, and Claire immediately recognized the same gentle strength in her face that she'd seen in Daniel's during their first meeting. "Claire," Daniel said, his voice warm with gratitude, "I'd like you to meet my grandmother, Helen Morrison." "Grandma, this is the angel I told you about." Helen stepped forward and took Claire's hands in both of hers. "My dear," she said softly, "Daniel has told me how you cared for him, how you reminded him of something we'd both forgotten about the simple power of helping one another. I haven't seen him this inspired in years." Claire felt tears welling up as she realized this wasn't just a thank you visit. Daniel had brought the person who mattered most to him to meet her, and there was something profound in that gesture. "Claire," Daniel said, his voice steadying as he found the courage to share what he discovered, "meeting you reminded me why my grandmother and I started Morrison Industries in the first place, to build something that would help people, not just accumulate wealth. I've decided to transform our entire company mission." He paused, looking nervous for the first time since she'd known him. "But I need someone to head our new healthcare initiative, someone who understands both the medical field and what it means to sacrifice for family. Someone with the heart of a nurse and the wisdom of someone who's lived through real struggle." Claire's breath caught as she began to understand what he was offering. The position would pay enough to secure your father's ongoing care and then some, Helen added gently. But more than that, you'd be helping thousands of families facing the same choices you've had to make. The diner fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the coffee machine. Claire looked around at the cracked vinyl booths, the faded linoleum, the place that had been her refuge for 2 years of struggle. Then she thought about her father, breathing easier in his hospital bed, and about all the other families who might benefit from the kind of help Daniel was offering. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But the most remarkable part was still to come, because Claire's answer would not only change her own life, but would transform Daniel's understanding of what true wealth really meant. Claire looked into Daniel's hopeful eyes and saw not the billionaire CEO from the news articles, but the vulnerable man who had stumbled into her diner a week ago, in need of help and human kindness. "Yes," she whispered, and then stronger. "Yes, I'll do it." The transformation that followed was more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. Within 6 months, the Morrison Healthcare Initiative had helped over 2,000 families navigate medical crises without financial ruin. Claire found herself traveling across the country, visiting hospitals and clinics, her nursing background finally put to use on a scale that amazed her. She worked alongside doctors to create support programs for family caregivers, and every day she remembered her father's words about kindness being something you carry in your bones. Daniel discovered that building something meaningful was far more fulfilling than accumulating wealth. He and Claire became close friends and then something deeper, bonded by their shared understanding that true richness comes from lifting others up. Helen, now 82, often joked that a broken arm had led to the healing of her grandson's heart. 1 year after that morning in Murphy's diner, Claire stood in her father's backyard, watching him tend to his tomato garden with steady hands and clear eyes. His surgery had been completely successful, and the experimental treatment program funded by Morrison Industries had given him a new lease on life. He looked up at his daughter, his face bright with pride. "You know, sweetheart," he said, brushing soil from his hands, "I always knew your kindness would take you places. I just never imagined it would take you this far." Claire smiled, thinking about the wedding ring on her left hand and the new life she and Daniel were building together. But more than that, she thought about the thousands of letters they received each week from families who had been helped by the foundation, people who no longer had to choose between caring for loved ones and financial survival. The little diner still stands on that stretch of interstate, though it's under new management now. Sometimes Claire and Daniel stop by when they're driving through, and she always orders coffee and pie, remembering the morning when 2 broken people, one with a broken arm, one with a broken spirit from too much struggle, found exactly what they needed in each other's unexpected kindness. As they sat in that same cracked vinyl booth last month, Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd driven past your diner that morning?" he asked. Claire squeezed his fingers gently and smiled. "I think we would have found each other somehow," she said. "Some connections are just meant to be." If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts about kindness changing lives, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey that proves sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can create the most extraordinary transformations. Sick mother of billionaire hadn't eaten in days. Waitress's shocking move left him speechless. What if the wealthiest man in the city discovered that true generosity isn't measured in dollars, but in the smallest acts of human kindness? On a cold Tuesday evening, 42-year-old tech mogul Daniel Chen sat in his sleek office overlooking downtown, fielding another call about quarterly profits. His empire spanned 3 continents, his name graced magazine covers, and his bank account held more zeros than most people could count. But tonight, none of that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Riverside Care Facility. "Your mother hasn't eaten in 3 days. Please come immediately." The words hit him like ice water. For all his success, for all the problems money could solve, he couldn't fix the one thing that truly mattered, his 78-year-old mother Elena's declining health. As he grabbed his coat and rushed toward the elevator, Daniel had no idea that a 24-hour diner and a young waitress named Grace would change everything he thought he knew about wealth, family, and what it means to truly care for someone. Where are you watching from tonight? I hope you're somewhere warm and safe. The drive to Riverside Care Facility felt endless, even in Daniel's luxury sedan. He'd built his fortune from nothing, a scrappy kid from Chinatown who taught himself to code and turned a college dorm room idea into a billion-dollar software company. His mother Elena had worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and in school, her hands permanently stained from years of cleaning office buildings before dawn. She'd given everything for his future, and now, as dementia slowly stole her memories, he felt helpless watching her waste away. "She keeps asking for her grandmother's dumplings," explained Janet, the night nurse, as Daniel hurried down the sterile hallway. "The kitchen tried making some, but she won't touch them. She says they don't taste right. It's been 3 days, Mr. Chen. We're getting worried." Daniel's chest tightened as he entered his mother's room. Elena sat by the window in her favorite lavender cardigan, the one he'd bought her for Mother's Day years ago. She was so much smaller than he remembered, her once strong hands now fragile as bird wings. "Mom," he said softly in Mandarin, the language of his childhood. Elena turned, and for a moment, her eyes brightened with recognition. "Danny, when did you get so tall?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He sat beside her, taking her cool hand in his. "I'm here now, Mom. The nurses say you haven't been eating. Are you feeling okay?" Elena's expression grew distant. "I keep waiting for grandmother to bring dumplings from the kitchen. She makes them with love, you know. Not like the ones here. These taste like sadness." Daniel's heart cracked. His great-grandmother had passed away 30 years ago, but in Elena's confused mind, she was still waiting for a meal that would never come. He spent the next hour trying to coax her to eat the hospital food, but she turned away from every spoonful. "It's not right," she kept saying. "Grandmother's dumplings have soul. These don't." As visiting hours ended, Daniel felt more powerless than he had since those early days of building his company. All his wealth meant nothing if he couldn't solve this simple problem, getting his mother to eat. Walking to his car under the flickering parking lot lights, he made a decision that would change everything. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse kitchen, scrolling through his phone, searching desperately for anyone who might know his great-grandmother's dumpling recipe. His assistant had already called 3 Chinese restaurants, but none could recreate something so personal, so specific to a family's history. Elena's condition was deteriorating, and the doctors warned that if she didn't start eating soon, they'd need to consider more invasive measures, feeding tubes and hospital transfers that Daniel knew would only make her more confused and frightened. The next morning brought devastating news. Janet called at 6 a.m., her voice tight with concern. "Mr. Chen, your mother collapsed this morning. She's stable now, but her blood sugar dropped dangerously low. The doctor wants to discuss hospitalization." Daniel canceled every meeting and raced back to the facility, his mind spinning with guilt and frustration. He'd conquered Silicon Valley, outsmarted competitors worth billions, but he couldn't figure out how to help his own mother. At Elena's bedside, he held her hand and made quiet phone calls to every contact he had in the city's Chinese community. Someone had to remember recipes like his great-grandmother's. Someone had to understand the difference between food made for profit and food made with love. As the afternoon wore on, his hope began to fade. Elena drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally mumbling in Mandarin about waiting for her grandmother. That evening, exhausted and desperate, Daniel found himself driving aimlessly through the city. His stomach was empty, he'd forgotten to eat in his worry, and when he spotted a small, weathered diner called Grace's All-Night Kitchen, he pulled into the parking lot. The neon sign flickered weakly, and through the windows, he could see checkered tablecloths and vinyl booths that had seen better days. It wasn't the kind of place a billionaire usually frequented, but something about its humble warmth drew him in. A young woman with kind eyes and flour, dusting her apron, approached his table. "You look like you've had a rough day," she said gently, setting down a steaming cup of coffee without being asked. "I'm Grace. This is my family's place. What can I get you?" There was something in her voice, a genuine concern that reminded him of his mother's younger days, that made Daniel's careful composure finally crack. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Before he knew it, Daniel was telling this complete stranger about his mother, about the dumplings, about feeling powerless despite all his success. Grace listened without judgment, refilling his coffee and nodding at all the right moments. Dumplings made with love, Grace repeated thoughtfully, settling into the booth across from Daniel. My grandmother used to say the same thing about her cooking. She'd tell me, Grace, anyone can follow a recipe, but you can't measure love in teaspoons. Daniel looked up, surprised by the understanding in her voice. Here was this young waitress, she couldn't be more than 35, speaking wisdom that billion-dollar consultants had never offered him. The thing is, Grace continued, wiping her hands on her apron, I learned something from watching my grandmother fade away. Sometimes it's not just about the food itself. It's about the feeling that comes with it, the safety, the memory, the love that seasoned every bite. Daniel felt tears threatening for the first time in years. But I don't know the recipe. My great-grandmother died when I was 12, and my mother. His voice caught, my mother is forgetting everything. Grace stood up and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. Through the pass-through window, he could hear her moving around, the familiar sounds of cooking that reminded him of childhood mornings when Elena would prepare his lunch before school. When Grace returned, she carried a small bamboo steamer and wore an expression of gentle determination. I want to try something, she said, setting the steamer down carefully. These aren't your great-grandmother's dumplings. I could never recreate something that personal. But I made them thinking about your mother, about what she needs right now. Sometimes when words fail us, love has to find another way. Daniel lifted the steamer lid, and the aroma that rose up transported him instantly. It wasn't exactly like his great-grandmother's cooking, but there was something unmistakably caring about these dumplings, something that spoke of patience and intention. I can't pay you for this kindness, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Grace shook her head, smiling. Money can't buy what your mother needs. But maybe love can find a way to reach her through food made with the right intentions. She packed the dumplings carefully in a container, along with a thermos of delicate broth. Tell her these were made by someone who understands that cooking is another way of saying, I care about you. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes sharing our stories helps us heal. As Daniel drove back to the care facility with Grace's gift warming the passenger seat, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in days, he had hope, not because of anything he'd accomplished or purchased, but because a stranger had chosen to care. The night nurse looked skeptical when Daniel arrived with a container of homemade dumplings, but she agreed to let him try. Your mother hasn't eaten anything since yesterday morning, Janet warned gently. Don't get your hopes up too high. Daniel nodded, his heart pounding as he made his way to Elena's room. She sat in the same position by the window, smaller and more fragile than ever, but her eyes tracked his movement as he entered. Mom, I brought something for you, Daniel said in Mandarin, pulling up a chair beside her bed. Someone made these especially for you, someone who understands about cooking with love. Elena's nostrils fluttered as he opened the container, and for the first time in days, she turned away from the window to look at him. They smell like... She paused, confusion flickering across her features, like caring. Daniel lifted one dumpling with chopsticks, his hands trembling slightly. Would you try just one bite? For me. Elena studied his face with the clarity that sometimes emerged through her fog of confusion. You look tired, my boy. Have you been eating? Even in her weakened state, she was worried about him. It was so perfectly his mother that Daniel had to swallow hard before speaking. I'll eat if you eat, he promised, holding the dumpling steady. Elena opened her mouth tentatively, and Daniel placed the small bite on her tongue. They both held their breath. Elena chewed slowly, thoughtfully, and then something miraculous happened. She reached for the chopsticks herself. These taste like someone was thinking of me, she whispered, taking another bite. Like someone wanted me to be okay. Tier by tier, dumpling by dumpling, Elena finished the entire container. Daniel watched in amazement as color returned to her cheeks and strength returned to her voice. "Will you tell me about your day, Danny?" she asked, using his childhood nickname as she sipped the warm broth. "Tell me about the good things." For the next hour, they talked, really talked, for the first time in months. Elena's memories came and went like tide, but her love remained constant. When visiting hours ended, Elena was sitting up straighter, her eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "And thank whoever made these dumplings." They understood something important, that food made with love can heal more than just hunger. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales like this one. Daniel drove back to Grace's diner with his heart full of gratitude, knowing he had to find a way to thank the young woman who'd given him his mother back, if only for tonight. Grace was wiping down tables when Daniel walked into the diner just before midnight, but her face lit up when she saw him. "How did it go?" she asked, setting down her cleaning cloth with hopeful anticipation. Daniel's smile was answer enough, but he told her everything. How Elena had eaten every dumpling, how they'd talked for an hour, how his mother had asked him to thank the person who understood that cooking could be medicine for the heart. "You gave me something I couldn't buy or build or negotiate for," Daniel said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You gave me hope. And you gave my mother a reason to fight." Grace blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Anyone would have done the same thing. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, not anyone. Most people see a successful businessman and assume he has everything figured out. You saw a scared son who needed help." Over the following weeks, something beautiful began to unfold. Daniel visited the diner every few days, sometimes bringing updates about Elena's improving condition, sometimes just needing the comfort of Grace's genuine friendship. He learned that Grace had taken over the diner after her own grandmother's death, keeping alive family recipes and the tradition of treating every customer like family. She'd struggled to keep the business afloat, working 16-hour days and worrying about rent, but she'd never lost her generosity. "I want to invest in your diner," Daniel offered one evening, but Grace smiled and shook her head. "Some things aren't about money," she said gently. "But if you really want to help, bring your mother here when she's feeling stronger. I'd love to meet the woman who raised such a good son." Elena did visit, on a clear spring afternoon when her mind was having one of its good days. She and Grace spent an hour in the kitchen together, Grace teaching Elena a simplified version of her family's dumpling recipe, Elena sharing stories about cooking for Daniel when he was young. "She has kind hands," Elena told Daniel afterward, and he knew she was right. Grace's hands weren't manicured or adorned with expensive jewelry, but they carried something precious, the ability to comfort, to nourish, to heal. As months passed, Daniel found himself transformed. He still ran his company successfully, but he approached his work differently. He started a foundation providing meals for elderly care facilities, ensuring that food was prepared with the kind of intention Grace had shown his mother. He spent more time with Elena, cherishing their conversations whether she remembered him clearly or not. The diner thrived too, not because of Daniel's money, but because word spread about Grace's extraordinary kindness. People came not just for the food, but for the feeling of being cared for, of being seen as more than just a customer. On quiet evenings, Daniel would sit in his usual booth, watching Grace work, marveling at how one person's compassion had created ripples of healing that touched dozens of lives. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales about the unexpected ways love finds us. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come not from those who have the most to give, but from those who choose to give what they have with open hearts. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May you find and share that same generous spirit in your own life. They pushed the pregnant waitress down the stairs for being slow. A secret billionaire CEO's response stuns everyone. What if a single moment of cruelty could change the course of 3 lives forever? In a small diner on Maple Street, where the coffee was always hot and the apple pie reminded folks of their grandmother's kitchen, 34-year-old Linda wiped down tables with one hand while gently cradling her 7-month belly with the other. The morning rush had been particularly demanding, and her swollen feet ached with every step across the worn linoleum floor. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, saving every penny for the baby who would arrive in just 2 months. Her husband had lost his construction job 3 weeks ago, and Linda's tips were all that stood between them and losing their small apartment. She moved a little slower these days, her body heavy with new life, but her smile never faltered when she served customers their morning coffee. Little did she know that this Tuesday morning would test everything she believed about human kindness. Where are you watching from today? Linda had been working at Rosie's Diner for 6 years, and in all that time, she'd never encountered customers quite like the 3 women who walked in that morning. They wore expensive clothes and carried designer handbags, their manicured nails clicking impatiently against the table as they demanded immediate service. Linda approached their booth with her usual warm smile, notepad ready, but before she could even greet them, the blonde woman with the sharp haircut snapped her fingers. "We're in a hurry," she announced coldly. "We have a board meeting in 20 minutes, and we need our orders taken now." Linda nodded politely and began taking their elaborate coffee orders, extra hot, no foam, oat milk on the side, with specific temperature requirements that would take the kitchen extra time to prepare perfectly. As Linda made her way to the coffee station, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her lower back. She paused, steadying herself against the counter, one hand instinctively moving to support her belly. The baby had been particularly active this morning, and Dr. Patterson had warned her about overdoing it. But they needed the money, especially with David still looking for work and the medical bills piling up. When she returned to their table 5 minutes later with their complicated orders, the 3 women were deep in conversation about stock prices and quarterly reports. Linda set down the first cup carefully, but the dark-haired woman immediately tasted it and frowned. "This isn't hot enough," she complained loudly. "I specifically said extra hot." "I'm so sorry," Linda replied gently. "Let me get you a fresh cup right away." She reached for the lukewarm coffee, but the woman pulled it away sharply, causing Linda to stumble slightly. The sudden movement sent another sharp pain through her back, and she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. "Are you even listening?" the third woman demanded. "We told you we're in a hurry. This is exactly the kind of slow, incompetent service that's ruining this country." Linda felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as other customers began to stare. She'd served thousands of people over the years, and she'd always prided herself on her careful attention to every order. But today, carrying this precious life inside her, everything seemed to take just a little longer. Linda hurried back to the kitchen as quickly as her swollen feet would allow, asking Joe, the cook, to remake the coffee order with extra attention to temperature. Her hands shook slightly as she waited, and she found herself thinking about her own mother, who had worked as a waitress while pregnant with Linda 40 years ago. "Kindness costs nothing," her mother always said, "but its value is immeasurable." When Linda returned with the fresh, steaming coffee, she moved extra carefully, taking slow, deliberate steps to ensure everything was perfect. But as she approached their table, she overheard their conversation and froze. "My husband's company is looking to buy properties in this neighborhood," the blonde woman was saying. "Once we tear down these little dumps and put in high-end developments, we'll triple our investment." Rosie's Diner has been here for 30 years, Linda thought to herself, remembering how the elderly owner, Mrs. Chen, had given her this job when she was struggling to make ends meet after high school. This place wasn't just a restaurant, it was where the neighborhood gathered, where lonely seniors came for company, where young families could afford a decent meal. As Linda carefully set down the fresh coffee, the dark-haired woman tasted it again and nodded approvingly. But just as Linda began to relax, thinking the worst was over, the woman noticed a small water spot on her silverware. "This is disgusting," she announced loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "How can you expect us to eat with dirty utensils?" Linda felt tears prick her eyes, but she maintained her composure. "I'll get you clean silverware immediately," she said softly. But as she reached across the table to gather the allegedly dirty utensils, her belly brushed against the edge, and she had to adjust her position to reach everything safely. "Oh my God," the blonde woman said with exaggerated disgust. "This is ridiculous. You're too pregnant to do your job properly. Someone this slow and clumsy shouldn't be serving food to people." The words hit Linda like a physical blow, and she felt the baby give a strong kick, as if responding to her stress. Other customers in the diner had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. Mr. Peterson, who came in every morning for coffee and eggs, looked like he wanted to say something. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Linda didn't know that, sitting quietly in the corner booth, a man in a simple flannel shirt and work boots was watching everything unfold with growing anger. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but Linda forced herself to focus on the baby growing inside her. Every tip, every smile, every difficult customer brought her closer to holding her child. She gathered the silverware with trembling hands, but as she turned to walk away, the blonde woman stuck out her perfectly pedicured foot. Linda didn't see it coming. Her toe caught the woman's shoe, and suddenly she was falling forward, her pregnant belly leading the way toward the hard tile floor. Time seemed to slow as she twisted desperately, trying to protect her unborn child, but gravity and momentum were stronger than her panicked attempts to right herself. She hit the ground hard, landing on her side with a cry that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent diner. Pain shot through her hip and shoulder, but worse was the terrifying stillness in her belly. The baby had stopped moving. "My baby," she whispered, her hands frantically pressing against her stomach. "Please, please be okay." The three women looked down at her with cold indifference. "Maybe now you'll be more careful," the blonde one said, gathering her purse. "We're leaving. The service here is absolutely unacceptable." They stepped around Linda's prone form as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. But they didn't get far. The man in the flannel shirt had risen from his corner booth, and something in his movement made the entire diner hold its breath. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but there was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself as he approached the fallen waitress. "Ma'am, don't move," he said gently to Linda, his voice carrying the kind of calm assurance that comes from someone accustomed to being listened to. He knelt beside her, his calloused hands carefully supporting her shoulders. "I'm calling an ambulance right now. Just breathe and try to stay still." The three women had stopped at the door, sensing that something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The man looked up at them with eyes that seemed to see right through their expensive facades. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly, but there was steel beneath the soft words. "You just assaulted a pregnant woman." "Assaulted?" the dark-haired woman scoffed. "She tripped over her own feet. We're not responsible for her clumsiness." But her voice wavered slightly, and Linda noticed the man was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments below." As the ambulance sirens grew closer, Linda felt the baby give a small, reassuring kick, and she closed her eyes in relief, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. The emergency room doctor's gentle smile was the first sign that everything would be okay. "Your baby is perfectly fine," Dr. Williams assured Linda as she lay on the examination table, David gripping her hand tightly. "But you need to take it easy for the next few days. No more double shifts." The relief that flooded through Linda was so intense that she finally allowed herself to cry. Tears of gratitude, exhaustion, and overwhelming emotion. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the three women discovered they weren't dealing with just any good Samaritan. Detective Morrison arrived within minutes of the 911 call, followed by two patrol officers who had been briefed on the situation. The man in flannel introduced himself simply as James, but when he handed Detective Morrison his business card, the officer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Ladies," Detective Morrison said, approaching the three women who were now looking significantly less confident, "you're being charged with assault. The entire incident was caught on the diner's security cameras, and we have multiple witnesses who saw you deliberately trip a pregnant woman." "This is absurd," the blonde woman protested. "Do you know who we are? I'm calling my lawyer." But her bravado cracked when James stepped forward, and she got her first clear look at the quiet man who had come to Linda's aid. James Hammond, CEO of Hammond Industries, was worth more than most small countries' GDP, but he'd built his empire from nothing, starting with a single construction company his grandfather had founded. He still visited job sites, still wore work boots, and still remembered what it felt like to worry about making rent. He'd been having breakfast at Rosie's Diner every Tuesday morning for 3 years, ever since his wife had passed away and the big house felt too empty. The simple kindness of the staff and the honest comfort food reminded him of his humble beginnings. "I don't make a habit of involving myself in situations like this," James said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of business negotiations. "But I also don't stand by and watch people abuse others." He turned to Detective Morrison. "I want to press charges as a witness, and I'm prepared to testify in court if necessary." The three women exchanged panicked glances. They recognized him now. His picture had been on the business section of newspapers more times than they could count. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But James wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a call that would change Linda's life forever, though she wouldn't learn about it until the next morning. 3 weeks later, Linda stood in the doorway of her new apartment, hardly believing what had happened. The spacious 2-bedroom unit was in a safe neighborhood with excellent schools, and the rent was completely covered by what James had quietly called a victim's compensation fund. David had been offered a foreman position with Hammond Construction, a job that came with full health benefits and a salary that would let Linda stay home with the baby once it arrived. The three women from that terrible morning had faced consequences that rippled far beyond the assault charges. The blonde woman's husband's real estate company had lost several major contracts when word spread about his wife's behavior toward a pregnant waitress. The dark-haired woman had been asked to resign from her position at an investment firm after the security footage went viral on social media. The third woman had quietly paid a substantial settlement to Linda and taken anger management classes, eventually writing a heartfelt letter of apology that brought tears to Linda's eyes. But the most beautiful change had nothing to do with money or justice. Rosie's Diner had become a symbol of community kindness. Customers began leaving extra-large tips, not just for Linda but for all the staff. Local businesses started hanging signs that read, "Kindness served here," and the diner's morning rush became a gathering place where neighbors looked out for each other. James still came in every Tuesday morning, but now he often found himself sharing his corner booth with other regular customers. Mrs. Chen, the diner's owner, had framed a photo of Linda holding her healthy baby girl, born exactly 2 months after that frightening day. The picture hung right next to the cash register, where Linda's bright smile reminded everyone who entered that kindness and cruelty both have consequences that ripple outward in ways we can't always see. On the day Linda brought baby Grace to visit the diner for the first time, James was there with a small wrapped gift, a silver locket that had belonged to his late wife. "Every little girl should have something beautiful to remember how loved she is," he said softly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Linda often thought about her mother's words, "Kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable." That terrible Tuesday morning had taught her that the opposite was equally true. Cruelty always comes with a price, and sometimes the universe has a way of ensuring that price is paid in full. Grace would grow up in a world where she'd learn that standing up for others isn't just right, it's necessary, and that sometimes the most ordinary-looking people carry the most extraordinary hearts. As Linda rocked her daughter to sleep that evening, she whispered the same words her mother had once said to her, knowing that kindness, like love, was a gift meant to be passed from one generation to the next. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us all of the power of human compassion.